Hi kids, I hope you had a fantastic first week back to school. I know last week was a bit confusing for us because of the choice board, but I reformatted it this week to make it more easy and convenient for everyone involved. Now, this week we're going to be talking about determining audience in persuasive and argumentative texts. If you're watching this video, that means you are probably on week 2 assignment 2, and if not, there is still a copy of this PowerPoint in that assignment. Feel free to read it, follow along with me as I go over some of the slides. Make sure to take notes and reference it later, okay? I'm not going to be covering all the slides in this presentation here. However, you'll get a better idea about what audience is. Now, whenever we think about an audience, we tend to think about the groupings of people. We don't think about why people decide to group together. We only really see them as a large, I guess, group of people watching, listening, speaking to one another, or engaging with some type of content. We don't think about them as individuals. What interests them? What interested them? What drew them to engage with that content? Why are they there? Now, the categories that we split up audience into address that. We have the intended or primary audience that is specifically selected by the author. If we're thinking about writing, the author is writing for a smaller group of people. They're interested in the topic that he's writing about. They are having their needs and wants addressed by the author. Now, what does that mean, Miss LeJam? I don't get it. What that means is think of it as a consumer. If you were to go to the store and buy something, would you buy something that you needed and wanted and were curious about? And how would I know that you were curious, wanted, needed that object? As an author, if I'm writing something about, I don't know, the question that's pondered in the scientific community, how do we clone people? Now, if I want to make a clone in my basement, I'm probably gonna go buy this book about how to clone people. All right, that is something I'm interested in. I want it because I want to create a clone of my dog in my basement, and you know what? That author is addressing my needs. Okay, that's I need it. I want it. I'm interested. I'm that small group that author is targeting. All right. Now, if you are a secondary audience member, you are a bit different from Miss LeJam trying to clone a dog in her basement. You are someone that comes across that piece of writing by chance, because someone makes you read it, by someone telling you to read it, suggesting it. You are not who the author had in mind when they wrote that book or wrote that piece of writing. You are not going to be interested or may not be interested in it as a reader. Instead, you're probably someone in a general audience, someone that is a student, or maybe even someone like me that's a teacher that's told to read whatever by the district or whatever by a student that comes at me with some suggestions. All right? If we take that example earlier of the scientist writing a how to clone people in your basement or how to clone things in your basement, I, Miss LeJam, a mad scientist, am definitely going to buy that book because it speaks to me on a personal level. All right? You, as a secondary audience, are probably just walking by in Walmart and you look to the side and see this book on how to clone things and you think it's going to be funny, so you buy it. Okay? You're not who that book was meant for. You were a secondary audience member that just came across it. Or maybe Miss LeJam decides that she's going to assign that book, much like she did with Fahrenheit 451, to all of her students and force them to read it and take quizzes over it. Now, none of you wanted to read that book. It does not interest you. The author did not write it with you in their thoughts. You are just a secondary party to this sad show of Miss Legit. I'm trying to clone her dog, okay? You are a secondary audience member, not the intended person, and you're just someone that came along for the ride, okay? Another way you can think of a target audience is if you think about it in terms of commercials or concerts, all right? If we have a rock concert, you're probably going to go to a rock concert if you like the genre or like the bands playing. If you are there for either of those two reasons, you are the intended audience member. Okay? You are intended to be there. If you're a secondary audience member, say you, as the intended audience member, decide to take your best friend with you, even though you know they hate that music and they don't like that band. They decide to go with you because they want to be a OG, a real best friend for you. They become a secondary audience member. They're not there because they want to be there. They're not there because they like the bands. They're purely there just because of you. So, in terms of the target audience, they're not the target audience. They don't fit the proper information to be a consumer, but they end up being one because of you or some other reason, some accidental exposure, or just coming across whatever it is that they came across. Now, if you want more detailed examples as to how target audience and intended audience come to be, or how you can see them in your day-to-day life, make sure you look at slide 6. I'm not going to go over it, but you can look at slide 6 on your own. Alright, what we're going to be focusing on today is intended audience, and how do we know who that is? So, remember back to earlier when I said students and teachers are not intended audience. The reason why we are not intended audience is because we are told to read things. We are not who that was written for. Whenever we look at a piece of writing, we often have to determine what the claim of the writing was and who would disagree with that or part of it, all of the claim, or all of the claim. The next thing we can consider is, where did you locate that article? What website was it? What news source or what book? Where is this coming from? Oftentimes, where something comes from gives way into the kind of audience it is for. Now, what is the purpose of the text? Why did the person write it? Who were they trying to persuade? What is the main idea or claim in the text? Is it something that could be agreeable? Is it general? Is it more specific? Does it talk about science? Does it talk about history, reading, art? What is it about? What tools does the author use to hook the audience? Now, when we think of tools to hook the audience, oftentimes we think about language, details, and figurative language. If we're thinking about language, think about it in this way. How does the author address what they're saying? Do they use complicated words? Do they use language that is specific to a profession or a type group of people, a category of people? If I'm writing a scientific article, I'm most likely going to use words that pertain to the science I'm writing about. If I'm writing about earth science, I'm going to use a lot of words about rocks, alright? A lot of things that talk about sedimentary and that type of stuff. Now, if I am aiming that towards scientists, that's going to make the most sense. They will understand the language I'm using. Now, what details are being included or excluded? How am I comparing things? How am I explaining them? Alright, if I use figurative language to compare one rock to the size of Kentucky, that could easily make my article go from being something geared towards a scientist to something geared more towards the general public by trying to alter the way I'm speaking about it. Now, I know that confused you, but let's look at the next slide here. Where did you locate the article? This is going back to how we know what it's for. If we look at these places here, the New York Times, the Huffington Post, the Guardian, Rolling Stone, these are for more general audiences. Think of like a casual reader. If we look at a specific audience like Teen Vogue, the Mary Sue, PETA, those are all geared towards specific groups of individuals. The New York Times caters to a large variety of people. Teen Vogue probably only caters to teenage girls or people interested in fashion that are of young age. That is who they're geared towards. Feel free to look at this slide that analyzes author purpose and how that influences audience. Now, the more we really look at how word impacts the audience, which is what I was speaking about right before my little segue, we have to think about the author's word choice, the level of vocabulary, and the types of figurative language used, all of which I addressed. You often use different sets of words when you speak to people. For example, if you speak to your friends, if you text your friends a message or a short story about how a dog bit you on your way home from school, you are probably going to use a whole lot of different language than if you explain the same story to me. Alright? We often choose the words that are appropriate for our audiences. What do we think is going to be allowable and make the most sense to the person we are addressing? The same thing goes for articles. If the author is addressing a group of people in the scientific community, they're going to use words that are specific to that scientific community. They're not going to treat their colleagues as if they're their parents or their friends and say, yo dog, that was messed up. I don't know, that volcano exploded. That is not what they're going to say. They'll probably use words like, it was a majestic mystery of how the volcanic ash erupted out of the seemingly asleep volcano. Language that is more descriptive and pertains to more specific or uses a more specific vocabulary is more likely or most likely to be targeted at particular individuals. Okay? Think about levels of vocabulary. And I know I just talked your ear off, so I'm just going to cut this video off here. If you have more questions for me, feel free to shoot me an email. Everything else is pretty much a wrap up of how we should consider or think about intended audience. I hope this helped to clear up some things. If not, like I said, shoot me an email. Alright, bye y'all.